Hello. It's absolutely pouring down with rain outside today, so we're in my kitchen, and this is another episode of the RheumRoom. Hello, welcome back to episode 3 of the RheumRoom. I had some nice feedback from the previous 2 episodes. Hope you have watched those, found them enjoyable. Especially some good feedback from the psoriasis video, with people being very interested in the relationship of skin conditions to potential MSK masqueraders, especially psoriatic arthritis. We're going to talk a little bit today about a similar sort of theme in that we have these diagnostic boxes for rheumatology. So we have conditions which people will be aware of, such as rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, axial spondyloarthritis as examples. We also could move into connective tissue disorders such as lupus. And I think one of the downfalls for recognizing these admittedly relatively rare conditions in musculoskeletal practice is that people will assume maybe that if their patient doesn't have symptoms classical of something like rheumatoid arthritis, that they therefore haven't got an inflammatory condition because they don't fit into the nice diagnostic box that we create in medical practice. Now, one of the things that came up on my course in Wales this weekend was discussions around quite a lot of overlap. And what we have to realise is that really, for want of a better term, these diagnostic boxes are a medical construct. They're there to try and help put people into categories where they might react to certain medications better, or certain imaging techniques or diagnostics to try and diagnose people with a condition that links symptoms together. But actually, there's a heck of a lot of overlap within these conditions as well. The rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, axial spondyloarthritis, all these difficult conditions to say, they are all related to autoimmunity. And much like everybody has a slightly different face, everybody has a slightly different immune system. So people do react in slightly different ways. Even if you take rheumatoid arthritis, for example, you have multiple different disease courses. So some people's disease will be quite aggressive, other people's will be very slow burning and never cause any damage to the joints at all. Go further out than that, people have different joints affected in rheumatoid arthritis. Let's say some people would have bilateral hand symptoms in their MCPJs, the metacarpal phalangeal joints, or some people might only have their feet affected, or even just one knee, for example. And within this becomes an ever-expanding grade of complexity. So then when you start to add on top layers of different rheumatology conditions, let's say the spondyloarthritis, which technically would be enthesitic, so they affect the enthesis of tendons, ligaments, etc., as opposed to synovitic, which is what rheumatoid arthritis mainly consists of, the synovium of the joints or the tendons. Then, though you can see where these diagnostic boxes occur from, but as we said just a minute ago, there is quite a lot of overlap. Then you bring in the connective tissues as well, the connective tissue disorders such as lupus, Sjogren's syndrome, and you again add a lot of extra complexity. So in my opinion, when I teach these courses, what I try to get across is that we need to be aware of the presenting symptoms of all of these conditions, or at least many of these conditions. And when, as physiotherapists, for example, we're referring into rheumatology, we need to be referring with a suspected inflammatory disorder. We might not necessarily know exactly what that disorder is, especially as things like lupus, for example, might even masquerade as a very obvious looking rheumatoid arthritis. So because of this, we need to go wider than just being able to recognize the joint symptoms of these inflammatory conditions, and we need to be aware of their multi-systemic effects. All of these conditions have an effect on multiple systems, even if we break it down into osteoarthritis, which I'm hoping to do some videos on imminently. We're starting to be aware that actually systemic inflammation, or low grade in osteoarthritis, but still systemic inflammation arising, can give problems within the joints, and will certainly in these inflammatory conditions will make those worse. So obesity, for example, creates inflammatory cytokines within the bloodstream, which will upregulate any inflammatory process and make the symptoms of something like rheumatoid arthritis worse. So we need to be aware of these effects. As we talked about in our last video with psoriasis, the joint symptoms that you might have in your fingers or your knees or your feet are then related to the skin symptoms, which is an entirely different system. As Andrew Cuff taught me, the integumentary system, which is just as difficult to say as all these rheumatology conditions. So we need to be looking at the wider picture with these patients. As physiotherapists, we're lucky enough to be taught quite a lot of medical background, not just the musculoskeletal system, and we need to be using that knowledge appropriately in this situation, but we also need to know the effects and how those present of these rheumatology conditions and what we need to do about that and how we link it together. Obviously, not everybody who presents with psoriasis is going to present with a psoriatic arthritis, but we need to be aware of how we screen that out and who we need to refer onwards. So for example, with psoriatic arthritis being a peripheral spondylitis sort of primarily, then you may present with psoriasis and tendon problems rather than a joint related problem specifically. So it becomes very difficult if you only are aware really in depth of something like rheumatoid arthritis, for example, and less aware of connective tissue disorders, then there are going to be a subset of patients that are unfortunately not referred to rheumatology appropriately. The other issue we have here are some of these patients are relatively unwell compared to the most part of the patients that we see coming into our musculoskeletal clinics, and this again is a problem. So the conversation arose over the weekend about someone who presented with multiple organ failure in the first instance, and this developed on later to get joint symptoms, etc., etc. But unfortunately for them, they were already being looked after under rheumatology because of that onset. However, if you had someone who was coming into your clinic with multiple joint symptoms, but they were also presenting at the same time with organ failure, then we need to be knowing about these systems as well and how we go about recognizing the problems. So again, it is not just sufficient for us to be asking about the joints and the musculoskeletal system. We have to be medically screening these patients more and more when they come into us to make sure that we're not missing these clinically important conditions. So asking about things like the bowels and the stomach for Crohn's, colitis, which we know are related to the spondyloarthritis, or iritis of the eye or uveitis, inflammatory eye conditions where people have had to go and have this treated. We need to know about these conditions and whether they're related. Obviously, we did a whole video on psoriasis and the skin, and also there are rashes that can be associated with some of the connective tissue disorders, and this again is well worth knowing about. So what the point of this video is here is just to say that we need to be expanding our knowledge, and if you don't feel confident in knowing about the different systems of the body, especially how they therefore then relate into potential conditions that we are interested in and may need to be referring on to rheumatology, then that's something that you probably should explore more. I still find it very difficult with my confidence, especially around the stomach. The bowel is not my area of expertise, and I feel like I lack confidence in excluding those conditions unless they are already diagnosed, which does make life quite a lot easier. It's something that I want to do some research into, is to ask questions around bowel habits and bowel changes, etc., so that I'm more aware with my patients when I need to ask those questions in medical screening, whether they need to be further investigated. We will go on in further videos to discuss some of these things in more detail. Like I say, I plan on doing a couple of videos on obesity and its inflammatory effects of the system to hopefully help us to understand that a little bit more and how that might affect our patients moving forwards. I hope that you found this video useful. There is more information around some of these topics on my website. Just head to rheumatology.physio. Make sure you subscribe to the videos to get updates as to when I release more. I'm hoping I'll be back outside soon. I don't like being cooped up indoors, much prefer being outside with the wind blowing in my hair. And if you want to find out more information about any of my other projects, then again, that's either on my website or most likely on my Twitter feed. Which is rheumatology.physio for both of those things. And I will see you out on the next video.